program will bring together people from around the world. Thank you for joining us in support of the museum's messages of memory and hope. It is now my pleasure to invite the Executive Director of the Agahozo-Shalom Youth Village in Rwanda, Jean-Claude Fura, to welcome you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Good evening, everyone from Kigali, Rwanda. I am Jean-Claude Fura and the Executive Director of the Agahozo-Shalom Youth Village in Rwamagana, in the Eastern Province of Rwanda. The Agahozo-Shalom Youth Village, much like the program today, is a space where Jewish and Rwandan values and history come together. Founded in the image of Israeli post-Holocaust youth villages, ASYV was built to provide a home and family for the orphans of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. Our students today are the next generation of Rwanda's agents of change, and I am proud that they are joining us tonight from our dining hall as we come together to remember the victims of the Holocaust and the genocide against the Tutsi. As you all know, it only took 100 days to take the lives of 1 million of our children, women, and men in Rwanda 27 years ago. Each year, between April and July, we pause to mourn, to cry, and to think of the family members we lost just because of who they were, Tutsi. They were not just numbers, they were relatives, they were loved ones, they were friends, they were neighbors, they were people with dreams. They were simply humans. We also do the same for the 6 million Jews who were exterminated in the span of 6 years, 80 years ago. While it is our moral duty to remember, we must always remember that the survivors of genocide do not have that choice. They carry their pain and trauma with them every day. It is sad and appalling that 27 years after the genocide against the Tutsi and more than 80 years following the Holocaust, there are still platforms given to genocide deniers. This is why it is critical that educational programs are created everywhere in the world so children and youth learn about genocide and all forms of mass atrocities. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to introduce Jacqueline Murekatete of the Genocide Survivors Foundation. I thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Claude and Elizabeth. My name is Jacqueline Murekatete, as you heard, and I'm a survivor of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. I come to you today as a founder of Genocide Survivors Foundation, a nonprofit organization based here in New York City, whose mission is genocide prevention education and supporting survivors in the areas of education, economic empowerment, and social services. We at Genocide Survivors Foundation understand that it is critically important to bring together survivors of the Holocaust and of the genocide, and to speak in one voice against the kind of extremism that enable the crime of genocide to take place. Personally, as a survivor, I also think it's very important to bring communities which have been victims of genocide, as I believe that there's a lot to learn. We can learn from each other in terms of healing and rebuilding our lives in the aftermath of death, as well as while at the same time preserving the memory of our loved ones. Personally, my own activism and involvement in the work of genocide prevention was inspired by a Holocaust survivor by the name of David Gertzman, may his memory be for a blessing, who I met in 2001 when I was a sophomore in high school. as he came to share his experiences surviving the Holocaust. And it is David who became a mentor to me and helped me realize even more the importance of speaking out and sharing my own story of surviving the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. So between 2001, when I met David, and when he passed away in 2012, David and I spent countless hours on the road in this country and around the globe, speaking to young people, high school students, middle school students, university students, about the dangers of anti-Semitism, of racism, of xenophobia, and all forms of extremism, which enable the crime of genocide to take place. And helping our audiences, young and old, to recognize the importance of being involved in the work of genocide prevention, helping them realize that the crime of genocide, as history has shown us, is a crime that can happen to any group of people given the right conditions. And as such, all of us, irrespective of our race, religion, nationality, ethnicity, we all have the moral and practical obligation to get involved in the work of genocide prevention. So it is my hope that today, by listening to our speakers, a Holocaust survivor and a survivor of the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, you will leave the program even more motivated to join all of us who are engaged in the fight against hate and all forms of extremism, and to create a world where diversity is not adversity, as David used to say, a world where human diversity is seen as an asset which should be embraced, not as a tool to divide us, not as a tool that should be used to pin us against one another. It now gives me a pleasure to introduce Shiri Sandler, who will lead this afternoon discussion. Shiri Sandler is a managing director of the Agahozo-Shalom Youth Village in Rwanda, and she's also the child of Holocaust survivors. So she's connected to this topic in more ways than one, and I invite her to lead our conversation today on memory, healing, and educating the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. As you heard, my name is Shiri Sandler. I'm the managing director of the Agahozo-Shalom Youth Village in Rwanda and the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. I'm honored to introduce to you today Maritza Shelley and Celine Uwineza, and have the chance to talk to them about their stories, the role education has played in their lives, and the idea of healing. After the panel, we will have the opportunity to ask Celine and Maritza your questions. While our panelists are talking, I'll ask you to use the chat feature only to ask questions for the Q&A period. All right, Celine, Maritza, welcome. Thank you both for joining us today. I'm going to ask you to start by introducing the audience to your stories. Unfortunately, because we want to have time to have you both in conversation today, I'm going to have to ask you to keep these introductions brief. For more of Celine and Maritza's stories, my colleagues will put a link to Celine's book and a link to Maritza speaking on YouTube in the chat. And I'll also be providing, just so we can stay on time, 1-minute warnings to both of you as you speak. Maritza, can I ask you to start by introducing our audience to your story? Just a moment, Maritza. Sorry, we are unmuting you. We're trying to unmute you. Maritza, I think you have to accept the unmuting. Okay. There we go. We're all together. Okay, thank you, Maritza. I'll ask you to begin again.
Okay. Everybody, my story very briefly started in March 1944 when the Germans occupied Hungary and immediately started the extermination of Hungarian Jews. I was at the time 15 years old, and I was taken to a slave labor camp where I worked as digging ditches, which they planned to use as keeping the Russian tanks from entering parts of Hungary. Of course, it never worked. And then after that, I was taken on what was called the Eichmann Death March, which was because they had no more wagons to take Jews to concentration camps. We had to walk, and which was days and days of walking towards Mauthausen, which was the camp that we were planning to end up at. But I was at that point with my mother and my sister, and my mother decided to save us and decided before we crossed the German border, we had to escape. And we did. We jumped off the highway at some point and managed our escape, which included a lot of luck and also a lot of guts. It included at one point asking a hitchhiking German Nazi officer to help us to get back to Budapest. And after he said, "How do I know you're not Jewish?" And my mother said, "Well, look at my two blonde daughters." He believed us, and we ended up on a German officer bus, which took us back to Budapest, and eventually we survived by hiding. So that's basically the story, and I'm very lucky in a way to be able to tell this story as often as I can. And so.
Thank you, Maritza, for introducing us to what sounds like a remarkable story. All survival stories, of course, are, and for your bravery in being here to share it with us today. Celine, would you go next and introduce the group to your story of survival?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Great. Thank you for organizing and for organizing this important event. And I'll try and keep time. My name is Celine Uwineza, and I am a genocide survivor of a genocide. I survived a genocide against the Tutsi in 1994. And allow me to share a screen that will help me present better. So my story of surviving the genocide started from the 7th of April to the 4th of July, like in Rwanda, who was here in Kigali and around Rwanda. I was 10 years old, and this is pretty much how I looked like. I was the last born. This is a picture of my family. We were a family of 7 people. I had 4 siblings, and this is my mom and my dad. And by the 7th of April 1994, what was supposed to start out like any other day, I would say that my innocence and childhood was robbed, because in the afternoon, my family was attacked, and my mother was beaten and shot on the foot. And the horror of the genocide has started on that day. That took more than 30 people in my family. And so my mother, my 3 siblings, and 1 million other lives who were brutally massacred to date. So this image illustration is to show what happened in the afternoon of the 7th of April. When I say my childhood and my innocence was robbed, this is my mother who had been shot on the leg. And these 2 are my sisters who were trying to help her. And if you could see, if I could zoom in, you see her face. she was in anguish, but she was also trying to comfort me as a child. And here, hidden, is my brother, who was taking orders from a nurse that was helping us. The way I survived, we, on the 7th of April, the soldiers left us. They wounded my mom, but they said, we'll come back for you maybe the following day, or you're going to be dead anyway. And in the morning on the 8th, my family decided so that we go and took refuge in a chapel, in a Catholic chapel nearby. So we went there, we found like around 200 people who had taken refuge there. But 3 days after, we were attacked again, and my family, my mom and my sisters and my brother were killed together with another 150 people. And the soldiers who were there and the militias who were called in Herahami said, the kids, go back to the chapel, go back to the convent with the nuns, we will kill you after, because kids were making noises, they were crying. And on that day, on the 10th of April, that's when I lost them, and we became orphaned at that time. And so we lived in the orphanage for 3 months, and from one refugee camp to the other. I give a lot of details in my book, how we had to leave the orphanage and go to the refugee camp, and eventually being reunited with my father and my brother, who were not in the country at that time. And by the end of the 100 days, so I said more than 30 members of my family were killed. This is a picture of my family, most of my family who were killed, my grandparents, and my cousins. Most of the people who are here were killed. And 12 years later, we exhumed the body, and this is how these are the bones that we were able to bury. And this is a family of my mother, my sisters, and my brother who were killed at that time. And what I can say is, after that, like any Rwandan person, we were in shock, and we had a lot of trauma and unanswered questions. But like any other Rwandan person, we had to pick up pieces here and there to rebuild ourselves. We had no choice than to move forward. And I think I'll stop there, and I'll continue to share my story as then we'll continue in the event. Thanks.
Celine, thank you for starting to share your story with us and for introducing us to your parents and your siblings. You know, you both were very young when you experienced genocide. You were actually relatively similar ages. How did you continue to build a future for yourself after that experience? Maritza, can you tell us a little bit of how you built a life after seeing your world destroyed?
Well, when the war ended, I went back to school for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, I felt this is not going to work. I had such an experience before that this kind of life of normalcy just didn't go well. And so I quit school. And eventually I also left the country. When I was 19, my mother and my sister stayed in Hungary. I came alone to the country. And at that point, of course, I had no choice but to take care of myself. And eventually I did go back to school and got a degree at university and so on. But it took a while before I felt that a normal life was something that I deserved.
Thank you. Celine, how about you? Can you talk about the experience of moving forward after the genocide and how you built the life we see you having today?
Well, I think for us, as it's hard to talk about me only and not talk about the community as Rwandans, because what enabled me is what enabled most of Rwandans that were facing sorry, let me share. I will continue to share this because it helps me being grounded. So in the aftermath of genocide, we had many orphans and widows, and I personally was living with my dad, and my brother went back to the university. And I would say that it was not easy because we had people who had trauma, and PTSD, physical wounds. We had a destroyed country, prisons were full, the economy was down, and it was really a hard time for the whole community as Rwandans. But what I could say that helped me and everyone else, I think, was first of all, we were left with no other choice than to move forward, and that was possible because there were no more ID cards or ethnic distinction between students. Let's say we were sent to go back to school, and because of the new government vision of unity, they had to banish ID cards that didn't have any ethnic. We were not called to identify ourselves as Hutu or Tutsi, and my father had to go back to business in order for him to cater for his son who was at university and for me. So it would not be possible if the Gacaca court, which was a homegrown solution, was not introduced, because all the genocide perpetrators who were in the country, most of them were captured and they were offered fair trial in the Gacaca court. And this is also one of the reasons why we were able to move forward, because I don't think it would have been possible if my father knew that people who killed his family or his brother, his dad, his wife, his children, who were not provided justice. I don't think it would have been possible. And I would say that I went back to school because the country was safe. There were no discrimination, and we had a lot of support from the community and the collective pain and the collective solutions that were put in place for the community helped us to move forward. Personally, I was blessed to survive with my father and my mom's sisters, who played a big role in making sure that I get all the support to be able to go back to school and to be able to have a future.
Thank you, Celine. It's really powerful to hear echoes in what both of you are saying of similar response. And obviously the situations of any genocide is different from the situation of every other genocide, right? Every genocide is unique, but has common features and certainly common trauma. And it's even just hearing you both for a couple of minutes, it's really powerful to see how this has impacted you. Maritza, you saying it took a long time for you to feel like you deserved an education and a future. Celine, for you to talk about your father and what it meant for him to have to rebuild his business and move forward in this country that he was a part of. And it leads me to wonder, and Celine, this is something you talk a lot about in your book, to be able to be here today talking about this evidences a certain amount of healing, right? Of at least assimilating that trauma and figuring out how to discuss that trauma. Can you talk about, Celine, I'll ask you to begin, and then Maritza, I'll ask you to speak, what healing means to you in this context, and if it's possible to heal?
Mm-hmm. I think starting with the last question, healing is a journey. I would say that there's some trauma or there's some wounds that will never be healed completely, but I will say that for most of the genocide survivor that went through the trauma, I think I will say that the wounds become scars and not open wounds that are continuously bleeding. And for me personally, I had my son that helped me heal. I went back to school in December 1994. So my brother and my father, my brother finished school and my father went back to business. And building a life was much easier because I was fortunate to survive with them. And you could see my father now, my brother is now got married, have 4 children, which is hope and light, some light on in my life. And eventually my father remarried, and I have 2 new siblings. And I got married as well to a wonderful man, Gilbert. And I worked also, and I have a consultancy firm. But eventually, after several years, I had a breakdown where I had to deal with my depression and PTSD that was coming without notice. And I had to deal with the inner self, the 10-year-old that was in me, that was preventing me to soar even high. And I was fortunate enough to work with the village. And while I was working there, it was in 2015. That's when I started to really have these nightmares that were coming, and I started to dream or to review it was like a movie to view, like dogs eating corpse, eating people, or people who died on the street, or everything that I've seen that was not processed. I started to process it while I was working at Agahozo-Shalom. And based on the programs that were there, I talk a lot about Tikkun Lam and Tikkun Halev. When I talk about Tikkun Halev, they were talking about, we need to mend the hearts of these children. So after 4 years, they will go and heal the world. He spoke with the 10-year-old in me, and he helped. I would say that the programs help and ignite my healing journey, really. And I documented everything in my memoir called Untamed. I wrote it as a memoir because it was not planned to be a book. It was planned to just be my therapy notes. And after that, when I started to share my story, that's when I realized that by sharing your story, you heal. By sharing your story, you are vulnerable, but you also receive a lot of love and a lot of support from the community and everyone around. So I would say that healing is a journey, a personal journey, but it will only be possible if we start it and if we have a community that supports around us. Thank you.
Thank you, Celine. Maritza, may I ask you the same question?
Yes,
if you
I just want to tell Celine that time does heal. Her experiences are quite recent compared to mine, which is like over 76 years ago. So the healing happens as you live your life, and mine has been a very, very long life. And life itself has its ups and downs and happiness and trauma. And so you deal with this. And as you deal with everyday life or more normal circumstances of trouble, it somehow the genocide part, it gets filed away. Not that it ever disappears, but you do heal from it. And I think the fact that I'm able to talk to mostly children, and children who are not Jewish, who have never heard of the Holocaust, to me, that's a way of healing, because making out of a terrible experience something that is going to be useful and that I feel is going to be helpful to everyone. So to me, that's a way of healing. Nobody is born a racist or an anti-Semite, but it happens very soon. And in Budapest, in the playground, if a new kid comes to the playground, the first question everybody asks, what's your religion? And if you're not the same religion, you know you don't play together because you know there'll be no friendship there. And that was a terrible, terrible mistake. And I hope that the message that I send to kids now, and it has to start with the children, is something that would have made the Nazi propaganda useless and not acceptable. If the kids of different religion become friends and get to know about each other and each other's religion and accept it, and not think of like they did of the Jews. They say they were an inferior race. It wouldn't work. If your best friend is a Jew, you wouldn't believe it. So I feel that my healing process is being able to send a message to the children growing up.
Thank you. It's so meaningful to hear that. And I hope you guys aren't looking at the chat at the moment, but the audience is very clearly feeling the power of that message from both of you right now, and deeply moved by the way you're talking about your survival and about healing. I'm going to, in a moment, move us to taking questions from the audience. So all of you out there, if you have a question for our survivors here today, I encourage you to put them in the chat. But before we do, I'm curious about why both of you decided to join us today. It's obviously very important and yet very difficult to tell these stories, to talk about these experiences. What is it like to talk about them in this global group today and with each other, with a survivor of a different genocide quite removed historically from your own experience? Would either of you like to take that one first?
Well, I feel very special about Celine, maybe because of also the age difference and having heard her story that was so terrible. I feel kind of grandmotherly towards her. I would love to hug her and comfort her. And so it means a lot to me to hear of a genocide of other countries and not be totally absorbed in the Holocaust itself alone. And so I'm very glad to participate in this. There's one thing, though, that is true of both of our experiences, is we knew what was going on in Rwanda, and the whole world knew. And many countries knew what was happening during the Holocaust. They heard about the concentration camps and the killing of the Jews. And yet, no one came to our rescue. And this applies today. You take the paper and you read it every day. It's horrendous what goes on in some places. Why doesn't the world come together and stop the genocide that still goes on?
Thanks, Maritza. I think for me, when I grew up and learned about the Holocaust and I just realized how humanity had, I understood how humanity had failed Rwanda, because these are the things that had happened many years ago, and there had been also some courts or resolution or motto that says, oh, genocide, never again, never again. But then a few years down the road, the genocide against the Tutsi happened, and many other genocides as well. So I think for me, meeting Holocaust survivors and being able to speak about stories and share stories is mainly a reminder to the next generation, to myself and to the next generation, that it's not a matter of creating a motto or creating values and put them on the wall, or on the website, or on the UN convention, but it's a matter of playing our part and making sure that we get educated, we get a personal interest in knowing other people's stories, or other genocide stories, but also learn from what led to this mass atrocity happening. It's hatred, it's intolerance, it's discrimination, and I am honored, I'm always humbled to be able to share my story as a tool to help me, or to help prevent for the preservation of records, and to create awareness, and to preserve the memory across generation. Because by sharing what happened in the book, it's a tool that will be passed on to the next generation. And for the generation that will come in from my family, for example, they will have a tool that will help them fight the genocide denials that we are seeing all over the world. And for me, it's really an honor and a privilege to play a part, however small it is, but making sure that looking back maybe 50 years down the road, I don't look back and regret for not having done anything in my power. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you both are speaking to something really key, right? About responding to what helps build genocide, and not just the moment of atrocity, but educating youth to recognize the dangers of prejudice, to recognize the dangers of hatred. And as we go into the questions from our audience here today, there's a link to what many of them are asking. One of the questions is about your response to some of the injustices in the world today, and how your experience as surviving genocide informs that response. Whether it's far-right governments, ultranationalism, hate, police shootings, extreme poverty, how does the experience you've lived through and the healing you found for yourself inform your response to seeing this kind of pain in other places in the world? That's open to whoever would like to take it first.
Are you asking me?
Sure, Maritza, if you want to, yes.
I don't have to go very far, actually, because I don't know if you watched the news on January 6th when the mob attacked the Capitol. One of the member of the mob was wearing a T-shirt which said Club Auschwitz. And it was clear what that message was. And many of his compatriots had the same message. They would happily start another concentration camp for the Jews. And that really shook me. Not that I am so naive to think that there is no anti-Semitism in this country, but that was too visible. And also that a Confederate flag was hung on the door of the Museum of Jewish Heritage, which was another message. So we have work to do here, right here in this country. And I hope I can do that as often as I can to be able to talk to school children. Unfortunately, us survivors are not surviving forever. There's no one really under 80 who can talk about their Holocaust experiences. So we will have to make the people who listen to us our witnesses, because we will not be here to tell the tale. And so I'm always grateful when I can do that and be able to send a message.
Thank you, Maritza. Celine, is there something you'd like to add there?
Yeah, I will add just a small comment on what Maritza just said. It's and we, even here in Rwanda, we're still or in the diaspora, we're still experiences hate and genocide denials, and people trying to cover up or to distort the truth of what happened. And that is not only against the genocide against the Tutsi, but it's against any efforts of peace that are happening around the world, or any effort that is being provided here and there. And I will say that, like they say, there's a say that speaking or words or speeches are cheap, but action actually what counts. I will say that I'm very proud to be called Rwandan today than 27 years ago, because we put together efforts and provided troops in the UN to help other African countries for sustainable peace, for as peacekeepers. And I think that's one of the walking the talk when we talk about genocide never again, or playing our part in building peace in the world.
Thank you. And I'm glad you've brought up the role that Rwanda as a nation has played, because I think it's very important to understand how a country recognizes its experience and actively works against that. And I think Rwanda has been, as a, your UN peacekeeping example is a good one, has been really at the forefront of that. We have a variety of other questions, and I think we probably have the chance for about 2 more today. There are some questions about denial, about both of your responses about denial, and how do you, as survivors, emotionally, I'll start with, deal with denial of genocide against the Tutsi and of the Holocaust, and how do you feel we can best work to eradicate that, both in academic work and sort of in our communities? Celine, would you like to begin?
Personally, I think when it started, I was so astonished. I was still young. I was like, how could people say that this didn't happen, or how could they lie about what I saw with my eyes, or what we saw as a community, or what we lived in. But again, as I was being educated yet at university, we had a course around general studies, and that's when I learned about the stages of the genocide, that it's actually we're still fighting. This is the last stage of the genocide around the world. It happened in Holocaust, it happened for Armenia, it happened everywhere where genocide happened. And I was comforted that, these are how other communities worked towards eradicating genocide denials, and they documented, and that's where I think most of the Holocaust survivors also wrote a lot of books and shared lots of testimonies, and they were not silenced anymore by the pain, but came together as a community to make sure that there are tools to fight, because the truth will always prevail. And I think for me, as I go forward and as I take pride in what my country is doing and my community, by making sure that we have historians, we have politicians, we have historians, we have genocide survivors, we have also young people who were born after the genocide that are taking on the work of making sure that they organize such events of Kwibuka every year, and that they are participating, they're asking questions. I see the raising of interest in the young people who were not even here during the genocide, that wants to actually take on the work of the grown-up people, that to make sure that the truth is preserved and the memory are preserved. So this is what I can say is the fight is on, yes, but the truth will prevail. Yeah.
Thank you. Maritza, would you like to add to that about fighting denial and how you best think it can be done, whether academically or in our communities?
Well, just as I said, I believe that the work has to be done with the children and in schools. And I think what people can do is, if they can influence their community, and so that the schools will teach this subject, that the question of genocide, whether in Rwanda or the Holocaust, will be taught, because the statistics are dismal. How many people have never heard the word or know about the Holocaust? Not only that they deny it, but they never even heard of it. And what we have to do is to really press the educational system to include that in every curriculum. And so there's no one answer to be able to save us from continuing. And
I think it's one of the things, and as I wrap this up, if there are any final questions people want to get in, we can take probably one more. One of the things I think you both are speaking to is something we think a lot about at Agahozo-Shalom with our kids, which is that giving children the space for healing, right? Working to repair the vulnerabilities that can lead to them taking on hate is so important. And whether that hate is anti-Semitism or racism or genocide denial, I think the work that both of you do really helps children and our adult communities as well find space for, as Jacqueline said, I'm not going to get it exactly the way you said it, Jacqueline, but letting our differences unite us and not divide us, right? Letting our common histories bring us together. So as we go into our final question, the audience has mentioned in a couple of ways that both of you really seem like you embody post-traumatic growth, that you have found ways to move forward. And they're wondering if you can speak any more to the role that memory and healing play in your life now and in the lives of your loved ones or other survivors in your communities. I think a lot of other survivors on this call today are inspired by your stories and also looking to see their own experience of maybe not being able to find healing in this way reflected in what you're talking about. So if you have words of comfort or words of wisdom or community for them, I think they would like to hear it. Would either of you like to take that first?
Okay. For one thing, with all the horrors and meeting with really cruel human beings, I also had experience with good people, brave people who were there to help us. And I don't think that we should really divide the world between good people and bad people. Everybody has a chance to change. And when I talk about my experiences, I sort of relive it in a way. I see myself on the road walking towards Germany. I see myself in a line of in the slave labor camp when we were lined up to be decimated. And I, I sort of not relive it, but it's there. I can see myself. I can see the surrounding as I talk about it. But that's not the total of my life. In fact, much of my life is exciting and a lot of good things happen. I have a fabulous daughter and a great granddaughter and a lot of friends. And now I met Celine, so that's also a great plus. So good things do happen.
Thank you. Celine, is there anything you would want to add?
Thank you. I think after Maritza's message, I think it's a message to all of us, our grandma, as you said. But what I can say is really that we're not alone to any genocide survivor who is here, who has been feeling maybe down or not knowing how his or her healing process is going. I just wanted to say that you're not alone, that you have a community around you to love you and committed to plant a seed of love and peace instead of a seed of hatred like we saw in the past years. But thanks, Maritza, for your comforting words.
I want to thank both of you for joining us today. I know this isn't easy. I appreciate so much you taking the time and being as open and vulnerable as you've been today to speak with all of us. We're now going to move into a memorial candle lighting led by survivor Celine Uwineza. So to all of you, if you have a candle with you, please feel free to bring it forward. If you'll give us just one moment as we move the spotlight.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Hi, Consolee.
Hi. I want first of all to thank Maritza Shelley and Celine Uwineza for your powerful words. Thank you so much, really, for sharing your stories with us. I'm sure everybody here is moved, and thank you for being with us. My name is Consolee Nishimwe, also a genocide survivor against the Tutsi in 1994. When the genocide happened, I was 14 years old. And in my household, I lost my dad, my 3 younger brothers, and many of my family members on both sides. Today, I just wanted to tell every genocide survivor is here to be strong, and you are really, I'm inspired by all of you. I want to all of you to raise your candles, light your candles. But before I say what I'm going to say what I say in Kinyarwanda also. Nitwa Consolee Nishimwe, nkaba ntuye jenoside iba nari mfite imyaka 14, nkaba narabuze mu muryango wanjye papa wanjye n'abo twari tuvindimwe batatu no mu mpande zose kwa mama na papa nkaba narabuze benshi. So ndagira ngo nihanganisha umuntu uwo ari we wese wabuze abe muri aka kanya, mukomere mwihangane. I also want to tell everybody who've lost their loved ones during the Holocaust, and I lit a candle in memory of those maybe 6 million Jews who lost their lives during the Holocaust, and many of who lost their lives during the genocide, more than 1 million of Tutsis who lost their lives during the genocide against the Tutsi. I lit this candle in honor of my dad, Goga Andre, my 3 younger brothers, Bonfils, Philibert, and Pascal. Ncanye urumuri nibuka ababuze ababo mu gihe muri jenoside yakorewe abayahudi, nkaba ncanye n'urumuri nibuka n'ababuze ababo muri jenoside yakorewe abatutsi muri 1994, nkaba ncanye n'urumuri nibuka abo nabuze ku ruhande rwanjye, papa wanjye n'abo twari tuva inda imwe. Let's remember those innocent lives lost and pray for healing to survivors. Thank you.
Thank you, Consolee. We're now going to share a musical commemoration from the students of the Agahozo-Shalom Youth Village.
I am who I am because I value my past. The memories of yesterday can never be changed, but they give me reason to live again. There is a reason I am here today, but there is no reason you lost your lives. You were called abusive names, deprive your eyes to be human, slayed because of who you were born. I was young, I still needed you, but you were taken away from me too soon. If I had one wish, would be seeing you again, to terrorist men and women, even though you were not here to see. Carrying on to make you feel proud out there, watching down at us. I am lighting a candle as a sign of resilience. I'm paying a tribute, you left a legacy, and I'm a fruit from the love you sow. Let's say never again, never again to genocide. They should be no more. There should be no genocide anywhere. Let's say never again, never again to genocide. Let's say never again, never again to genocide. I am a witness that if you and I come together as one, we can make sure genocide never happens again. History should be told and passed on to the further generations. Let's all stand up and always sing out, never again to genocide. No, let's say never again, never again to genocide. There should be no more. There should be no genocide anywhere. Let's say never again, never again to genocide. Let's say never again to genocide.
I want to thank Maritza and Celine for sharing their stories with us today. Jacqueline, Consolee, and all the other survivors of both the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi and survivors of the Holocaust who have joined us today for being here. Thank you all for joining us as well from more than 7 countries around the world to remember the victims of the genocide against the Tutsi and the victims of the Holocaust, to honor survivors and to support one another during this difficult period. The Holocaust survivors I grew up with taught me that we must recognize our shared histories and let them bind us to others different from us. Pain and trauma can be isolating, and in a time when we cannot feel our communities around us, I am glad that we're using this opportunity to honor those we loved and lost by being here together today. If this event has been meaningful to you, I hope you'll consider supporting the organizations that made it possible: the Agahozo-Shalom Youth Village, the Genocide Survivors Foundation, and the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. Thank you again for being with us today. May the memories of those we've lost be for our blessing.